All right, Munaf, this will probably take the biggest chunk of our time as we turn our attention to the Cleveland Browns, whose quarterback room reads like a who's who of who? Who? It is Joe Flacco in the room. Kenny Pickett has entered the chat. Dylan Gabriel, Shaduer Sanders, and Deshaun Watson waiting in the wings, wondering when's it going to be my turn again. This one, Munaf, even if they do solidify who's going to get the ball on day one, I don't know that I want any of them. However, in a 2 quarterback system, you may be grabbing for one of them. So I guess the question is, who gets the start on day one and who backs them up? Because there's 4 or 5 viable guys on this roster that can be the guy for Cleveland.
So the first question is what is going to happen with Deshaun Watson, right? Because they paid him that guaranteed $230 million. I know he obviously had the torn Achilles, and I think he re-injured it again. So I'm not sure that he's going to play at all this upcoming season for the Cleveland Browns. And again, Rod, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but everything that and it's funny because you have a Joe Flacco that's right now on the depth chart listed as the number one guy at 40 years old. And then you have Shaduer Sanders, like you mentioned, that from everything that we're looking at videos and reports coming out of Cleveland, that he has looked pretty sharp. There are some questions about his arm strength and maybe holding on to the football a little bit too long, especially when you talk about when you go from the collegiate level to the pro level, the game is a lot faster at the pro level. And I don't think that's something that Shaduer Sanders can afford to do, or holding on to the football that long. And if you watched him play at Colorado, which a lot of us did because they were on national TV a lot, that he does hold on to the football a little bit too long. So that might be a concern. Dylan Gabriel, I crossed off the list immediately. Kenny Pickett, I think, will probably end up being the third string quarterback unless there is some type of trade that transpires maybe before the season starts, that an injury occurs, or he ends up, being that backup guy, because I think he can fit in nicely in a backup role. I think they start the season, Rod, with Joe Flacco just because of the track record. He's been in the system, I believe, before, and he led the Browns, I want to say, to the playoffs one year, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, back in the 2023 season, he came in, played in 5 games for the Cleveland Browns, threw for 1,616 yards, had 13 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. But I think there's going to come to a point where either Joe Flacco is either going to, number one, get injured, or number two, that they're ready to start one of these younger guys. So I think gun to my head, I would probably go Shaduer Sanders. I don't know if I'm drafting him or not, but I think we're going to learn a lot more as we get into the preseason. And, I believe I was reading an article before we had started recording that there was a plan that Kevin Stefanski has on who he wants starting the game for the preseason week 1 for the Cleveland Browns. And obviously we'll hopefully find that out sooner rather than later there. But the reports that have come out, the numbers have looked really good for Shaduer Sanders. The touchdown numbers have been there. I think I'll pull up the numbers from today while we get your thoughts here, Rod. But I think if you had a gun to my head, it would be Shaduer Sanders. I think that eventually gets the keys of the offense.
Yeah, and there's a lot of folks out there that are ready to draft him, and they're stashing him because they think that he is the next best guy. But you look at Joe Flacco, he hasn't played a full season since the 2017 season in Baltimore. Yeah. Since then, it's just been a smattering of spot starts and coming in off of the bench for folks. I mean, he's thrown for at least 1,000 yards in 3 seasons in a row in limited action. So, I mean, I don't know. I feel like you should start with Flacco because, like you said, Sanders, this is my problem. Okay. Because I've watched this happen a few times now, especially as a 49ers fan, right? Where you go out and you draft these guys with the number 1 overall pick. You draft these guys with the top 3 pick, and immediately you expect them to become NFL Hall of Famers the second they set foot on the field, right? Alex Smith is a prime example of a guy that, boy, the Niners just threw all their hopes on him right away to turn the ship around, to make the team Super Bowl ready in the first season that he ever set foot. There was no realistic expectations out of that. And I feel like we're almost doing the same thing with Sanders, with all the hype train around him, with everything that's been televised, and his whole world has just been clocked from beginning to end. I feel like the Browns, they need that kind of a hope, right? They need the story to come out that this guy's going to take them to the promised land immediately. And then when they struggle, a la Trey Lance, a la Justin Fields, all these guys that there's one in maybe 5 or 6 that will come out and be that guy immediately, right? But you very rarely see that at all anymore. And it just sucks because you put them in a situation where they struggle and then you say, well, you're not that good. And it's like, well, you never gave him a chance to be good. So you start out with Flacco, let Sanders sit there a little bit and learn, right? Give him reps, whatever, and then send him out there maybe mid-season. But yeah, I think you have to start the season with Flacco. But am I drafting him? No, and really neither is anybody else for that matter right now. His ADP 232 overall, quarterback 36. So not even in a 2-quarterback league is he going. So yeah, I mean that's Joe Flacco not getting love.
Yeah, and again, like you mentioned, he's with Joe Flacco. He hasn't finished a complete season in I don't know how many years now, and the approach of the approach that I feel like is correct. And if I was a GM or a head coach, is that if I'm drafting, even if it's the first round, maybe not the first overall pick or the top 3 picks, I think the Chiefs did this with Patrick Mahomes, that they let him sit for, I want to say, was it the entirety of a season and then brought him in, or I keep forgetting the timeline of that, but it gave him time to adjust to the NFL level, because I always said that there's an adjustment level going from the collegiate level to the pro level. Obviously, when you have so much more money involved and playing on Sundays versus Saturdays, it's a completely different ball game, especially mentally. So I think you would give some of these guys like the Shaduer Sanders of the world, the Dylan Gabriels of the world, let them hold that clipboard for the first 8 games, 9 games, 10 games, and if you feel like your season is lost, or if you need to make that quarterback change, go ahead and do it. And then I think that gives those type of quarterbacks, these young quarterbacks, an opportunity to succeed a little bit more versus throwing them into the fire week 1 and hey, here's keys to the offense. You're going to be our starting quarterback. Because again, like I mentioned, you're learning. You were so used to, let's say, use a 2-3 year quarterback at a specific college. Now you're learning a pro system. It's completely different. There's a lot more details and a lot more things that go behind it at the NFL level there. So yeah, I think we're in agreement that it is Joe Flacco, maybe for the first 2, 3, 4 weeks. And as long as he can go, if he doesn't get injured, I mean, look, he is 40 years old, right? And maybe they put in Kenny Pickett for a couple of weeks, see what they get out of him. And maybe at the tail end of the season, you see Shaduer Sanders come in. And when you're trying to make that playoff push, you need to get those wins. And he's having a pretty good season. That's when you pick him up. But when your drafts are going on right now, especially into the month of August here, Rod, that you're probably not I don't think you're drafting any of these quarterbacks here for the Cleveland Browns.